Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I am hosting the workshop today, so I'm going to keep an eye here on the waiting room and make sure everybody gets in. So I'm just going to kind of be back and forth here for a minute. Nope, great question. So Christine, if you entered your name and information for the Next Gen workshop, either last night or earlier today, then you don't have to enter it again. You'll get all the Next Gen information if you've entered it already. So great question, thank you. Okay, so today we're going to talk about intergenerational ministry teams. A lot of what we'll talk about today will apply to really any kind of work team, but we'll focus specifically on ministry settings, whether in missions or the local church or faith-based nonprofit. I'm just talking really kind of about some of the different behaviors and attitudes and approaches to the work team or environment context. I'll highlight just a few things from last night or even from Jenny's workshop earlier today. There'll be a couple of things that'll be a little redundant just in case there's some people who this is your first workshop in the track, but most of it will be new information. So we are going to be talking about keys to intergenerational ministry teams. Okay, get going here. So to start, why don't you just in the chat box, as people are still kind of jumping in, just post what are some generational differences that you have observed on ministry or work teams that maybe have even caused a little bit of friction or misunderstanding, places where sometimes some of the tension can emerge when we're working in teams. So go ahead and just comment, one word, whether it's communication or technology or something, just throw in the chat box what you see as some of these sources of generational differences. Let's just see what people are seeing out there. Okay, perspective on discipline, very good, yes, definitely. What else? Apparent unwillingness to initiate or look for ways to participate. Okay, great. Maintaining engagement, lack of commitment, unwilling to listen, work with leadership. Great, we're really going to get into that specifically today. So great comments. Okay, lack of respect for experience. Absolutely. Approaches to discipleship. Yes. Long-term commitment versus bouncing from thing to thing. Yes. Very good. These are all good ones. Okay, we're going to tackle some of these today. So short attention span. Yes, very good. Okay. Feel free to post others in the box if you're still writing. I'll keep my eyes on that. So really quickly, here are kind of the generations as we have them today in the workplace, give or take a few years. So people kind of use a range, but these are basically the generations that we're looking at. So really in the workplace today, we have Gen Z who is just entering either missions teams or, volunteer staffs at local churches and, the workplace. We have millennials who now are approaching 40. The oldest members of millennials are reaching middle age. So this is a generation that's really starting to step in and take a lot of leadership roles. A lot of Gen Xers and boomers are really in those mid-level management and higher level management jobs right now, primarily. Most of the silent generation has retired at this point, but still maybe serves on boards and such. So just because Gen Z is the newest kind of member in the workforce, I'm just going to highlight a few things about them specifically. We talked a little last night and Jenny talked a little, but it can be helpful just to have a quick review of some of their core traits as we're thinking about engaging this new generation into a context where millennials, Gen X, boomers have all been working for a while. So Gen Z is really self-learners. They're used to looking for information, finding information, YouTubing it, Googling it. They have unprecedented access to information, but sometimes because there is so much information, they can be plagued by insecurity or decision paralysis. They also have kind of this fear of failure. So in the workplace, often it comes across as maybe a lack of commitment or decisiveness, an inability to maybe solve problems because they do just have so much information, which sometimes can be overwhelming. But the great thing is that Gen Z knows how to find information. So if you put them on a task and you empower them, they really are great at finding information and applying it. They are very, very connected, but individualistic. As Jenny said in the last workshop, they like to learn independently. We saw millennials are much more collaborative or team oriented. Gen Z wants to be valued as an individual for what they bring to the team. They value equality, and they tend to though make their own decisions based on what they feel, not necessarily on what the whole group is saying. Because there is really with Gen Z this focus on self. So developing yourself, honing your personal skills, competing in a very competitive global context. So as we look to engage them on teams, it's really critical that we view them as individuals. We view their individual talents, skills, and abilities, not just being focused on the role, but being focused on them and how they can engage the organization, not just the role that we need a person to fill. Okay, so really that individualistic piece is critical. They are the most diverse generation in the history of our country, but they sometimes struggle with their identity and a sense of conviction, because there is just so much out there. We'll talk in a minute. They've been taught that identity is fluid. They've been taught that, you know, you get to choose who you are and how you define yourself, but sometimes this can cause a little bit of uncertainty for them. They also, the highest moral value for Gen Z, as we've discussed in previous workshops, is tolerance. So they really want to make sure that everyone is being valued. So in a team or a company, if they don't feel like that's happening, they're going to disengage pretty quickly. They're very future focused. So one of the things we want to make sure we're communicating as they're on the team is how what they're doing right now is helping prepare them for the future, how it's investing, whether it's skills that they're learning or experiences that they're getting to have. We want to make sure that we can communicate and explain to them how those are helping them. The other thing that can be really, really helpful in retaining young people, keeping them engaged and excited, is to ask what their dreams are for the future. So what are they focusing on in the future, and coming alongside them in that volunteer position or that work position and saying, hey, what experiences right now or what learning right now would you like to have that will help prepare you for that future goal? Show that you're invested in their future, and it will go a long ways towards them being invested in the team or company that you're a part of. They work for success. So they are avoiding debt, and they're asking, what's in this for me? Because they do feel like the world is a very scary and uncertain place. So they want to make sure that everything that they're doing is contributing to their future and their success in some way. So being able to communicate that is going to be really important. They're also very cautious and realistic. So here's something that's really interesting is that, you know, a couple years ago, we saw a lot of Gen Zers saying they want to be entrepreneurs. Up to 70% of high schoolers were saying that they want to be entrepreneurs. They have creative ideas. They can think outside of the box. They see new ways of doing things. They have incredible entrepreneurial spirit, and they have the tools at their disposal. So they can leverage technology. They can leverage connection. They can resource themselves very, very well. And so we see young people running businesses from their own homes, you know, in their pajamas in their bedroom with their laptop or their smartphone, because they have all these tools at their disposal. However, even with this entrepreneurial kind of mindset, many of them are choosing to go and work for an organization as a full-time employee because they like the security of it. It feels very, very risky to be on my own. So they want that security of the paycheck. They're risk averse, and they have been raised in this culture of safety that tells them to do what's safe. So whereas we saw millennials at this age much more idealistic and optimistic, we see this generation much more cautious, valuing their privacy and wanting to do what's going to be smart in the long run. So understanding that about them can be very helpful as we're engaging them in the workplace. Okay, so let's look at some of the differences we see across generations. I think this is so fun. So attitude with authority, which came up a couple of times here in the chat box. It comes up every time we talk about this. There is a distinct shift in how we view authority today as opposed to, you know, a couple of decades ago. So last night, if you were in my workshop, I talked about just how we've seen a collapse in power distance, how we used to have, you know, very established hierarchies where we respected people based on experience or education or title or position. And it really was the hierarchy that gave people authority authority and we respected the position, right? That a lot of that came out of like the Industrial Revolution, or it was reaffirmed in the Industrial Revolution, because prior to the Industrial Revolution, we had an agrarian, primarily agrarian society, where you were working with your family, you were working with the neighbors, you were working with Uncle so-and-so, or, you know, a grandma or somebody, and you had relational capital that led to you respect it because of the community, because of the relationship and those kinds of things. When the Industrial Revolution happened and everyone was moving to big cities and working with people they had never met, living next to people they had never met, in big factories and corporations where they were working for people with whom they had no relationship, we really needed there to be a power distance in order for people to respect authority. So that was one of the things that really reinforced this positional authority. And so we would see, you know, teachers standing in front of the classroom, talking at students all day, and the students sitting and listening and taking notes, right? Or you see, you know, even in church, you know, the teacher or the pastor standing in front, explaining to people what they need to hear, and people taking notes and listening. In the workplace, you have bosses standing up in meetings and giving directives, sitting in the corner office. So there was this distance between the people with power and the people who are listening or working, right? Literally, it was represented with a power distance, but that has collapsed in the last decade or two as we've seen things like technology make information accessible to everyone. We see everyone being able to have a voice, everyone being able to share their opinions. And so technology has really leveled the playing field a lot. And young people often feel like they don't need authority figures, right? You know, I have a friend who was, her husband wanted to teach their son how to fix the sink because the sink was broken. He's like told his teenage son, you know, come on in, I'll teach you how to fix the sink. Well, what does his son say? Of course, Dad, I don't need to see how to fix the sink. If I ever need to fix the sink, I'll just YouTube it, right? So they feel like they have access to this information. They don't need someone with a degree. You know, I said last night, I teach at several universities. My students can Google in 5 minutes as much information on a topic as I maybe spent, you know, a couple classes in my doctoral program taking. So this access to information and being able to communicate and have a voice has really changed the dynamic. So what we see today is that authority is built on the ability to invest and have a relationship. So it's really relational capital that gives us authority today. And this is where we see with millennials, they're choosing who they're going to follow based on if they feel that person is authentic and transparent and cares about me, is investing in me. So let's just back up. I kind of got ahead of myself, but the silent generation coming out of World War II really just endured authority. Whatever the commander told you to do, whatever you had to do, you did it. Boomers came along and were like, we're going to change the world, and kind of replaced, the silent generation and made a lot of changes. So the boomer generation really was the building generation that, built a lot of organizations, and did replace the silent generation and launch a lot of new things. Xers were the latchkey kids who came along, and mom and dad were both working outside the home. In many cases, there were a lot more single parent families as divorce rates went up. And so Xers really were the latchkey kids who kind of raised themselves and raised each other. And so they kind of had this negative attitude towards authority and kind of was just like, let me be, I'll just do my job, let me alone. And so bosses kind of learned, well, they don't want us telling them what to do or whatever. Very individualistic generation. Then we have millennials who want relationship and want to be mentored and invested in, and are choosing them. And now Gen Z is coming along, and they need that mentoring, they need that relationship, but they often feel like they can do it themselves, right? They can YouTube it. Okay, so that's how we're seeing some of these attitudes with authority change. And so as leaders, as managers, as mentors, as pastors, what we have to focus on is how do I build the relational capital that will allow me to have a voice and authority in young people's lives that I might be managing or mentoring. And what's so powerful is that when a young person understands, when they choose you, when they understand that you're invested in them, they are more committed often than some older employees or team members might be, because they will serve and they will be committed to someone who they know they can trust. So that relational capital is much more powerful than positional authority. It just takes a lot more time and energy and effort. Okay, there's just changing views on the role of relationships too. You know, with Gen Z, sometimes their view on relationships is utilitarian. And it's like, what is it? What's in it for me? And that's where we want to make sure that in our relationships with them, we are investing in them in some practical way, because that's going to get us the door into a deeper relationship with them, where we can really encourage them and inspire them, and where they can respond to a greater purpose that we might want them to be involved in. Millennials, of course, are global, 24/7 connected. Gen Xers tend to be very focused on those central caring relationships. Boomers also kind of looked for the usefulness in relationships in many cases, as they were building a lot of ministries and organizations. Value system, I'll just talk to millennials and Gen Z a little bit, but what we see with millennials is where we talked last night, they kind of shop around, right? They pick and choose kind of what resonates with them, what feels right to them. And Gen Z is very pragmatic and very practical. So I'm going to do what's going to help me be successful in the future. Okay, that is really their values. So the two number one goals of Gen Z would be to be happy, because they feel like they're in such an uncertain world, and to have financial security. So those two things are really coming out of a lot of the tension and turmoil in our world today. So understanding those can help us identify how do we want to best motivate that. The role of a career, so really went from, in the silent generation, a means of living, to boomers really made it a central focus for a lot of individuals in the boomer generation. Career became their identity, and so Gen X, who were the kids of boomers and watched this, kind of felt like work was a bother. It kept mom and dad at work during my baseball games or basketball games, and left me sitting on the couch watching MTV while they were, out saving the world. And so work was more of an irritant. Millennials really saw work as they were entering adulthood as a place to serve. They wanted to have a higher purpose. They wanted to make a difference in the world. And I love that about millennials. And I'm so excited as they're beginning to take leadership roles. We're really seeing millennials do want to serve, and they want to make a difference. And they have optimism that that can happen. Gen Z, very much, again, like I said, they're very independent, very individualistic. Everything has been kind of customized to them from the time they were very young. They could pick, what device they want to use, how they want to use it, what show they want to watch, when they want to watch it, how they want to watch it. Everything, even in education with student-centered learning today, everything is student-centered. So a student can log on the computer and pick up on their reading program or math program exactly where they left off, versus needing to kind of accommodate to the whole class. So as a result, they really want their work or their ministry to be connected to something that they are good at, a hobby, a skill. And so this is, as we're mobilizing them for missions, or as we're engaging them in the workplace or on a team, really identifying, what are your skills? What are your passions? How can we find a place for you to utilize those? So that individualization can be really, really powerful. Okay, as far as schedules, we know they are multitasking. Gen Z is a multitasking generation. Millennials tend to have a very volatile schedule, with things always being added or taken away because of technology, right? I mean, they can get a text message, and this is the same with Gen Z. They can get a text message that friends are getting together in half an hour, and it can change their whole plan. Whereas back in the day, we had our day timer, and we would plan out our lives for the next 3 months. So sometimes when younger generations might seem unwilling to commit, or unwilling to like pencil something in, 3 months down the road, it's because they understand that their schedule can change constantly, that it's very volatile, that they don't know. And especially in today's pandemic world, where school's virtual one week and then it's in person the next week, and then restaurants are open this week and now they're closed this week, like planning, their whole idea of planning far in advance just seems kind of purposeless. So like when you're trying to plan, say, a volunteer team at a church with someone to teach every Sunday morning, a youth group or something every Sunday morning for the next 6 months, that's very overwhelming to them. They would much rather be able to say, hey, can I just tell you when I'm available this month, right? And so just sometimes asking for shorter commitments, but following up and having multiple short commitments over one long-term commitment can be a really great way of engaging the younger generation. Okay. Life paradigm. So, a World War II generation, silent generation, be grateful you have a job, right? They came back after the war and they were just thankful. Boomers, you owe me, it was the baby boom generation. So a lot of focus on them. So there's a lot of similarities between boomers and millennials, actually, two very large generations, both very much valued and wanted, and growing up in a period of relative stability. So boomer Xers, however, were more, kind of ignored at times. And so they really want people to relate to them, right? Relate to me. I want to be known. Millennials, life is a cafeteria. Again, the shopping, picking and choosing. And there's so many options for them that's where that decision paralysis can happen for especially younger millennials and Gen Z. Here's something else that we're seeing with Gen Z. There is just such an uptick in anxiety, in depression, in fear, worry, even suicide with this generation. So there are a number of factors that are contributing to that. One of them is just the isolation that is sometimes happening because of technology and the lack of like face-to-face emotional connection with people. The fact that technology is not just distracting to them, but it's distracting to the adults in their life who need to be investing in them. So in many cases, whereas millennials were, let's go change the world, Gen Z is just kind of holding on and saying, I'm hoping and coping. I want to get through this. So this is where coming alongside them and really inspiring them and encouraging them can be really, really powerful. And it might look a little different than what we did with millennials. I love this sense of identity. Silent generation, very humble. Boomers and Xers, I'm valuable. Millennials, I'm awesome. Gen Z, I'm fluid. And so really what we're seeing again is just that lacking of that sense of identity, conviction, who I am, because they're being told you can define who you are. So a lot of times, what we're seeing even in the workplace, but especially in church context or in ministry teams, helping them process that. I'll talk at the end, the value of things like personality profiles and giftings assessments, and just the relationship where you have a relationship with a young person and you can say, I see this gifting in you. I see this passion in you. I see this thing that God has put in you, and calling that out, speaking it, the truth of it, because they do feel like sometimes they're struggling to figure out who they are. And so just that can be really, really positive. Okay, of course, technology, younger generations just are digital natives. So really maximizing some of those skills, but also helping them learn how to manage those can be really, really helpful. One question I get a lot is, can we tell missions teams that they can't bring their cell phones or they can't use social media, when we're on a short-term team or when we're in team meetings or in the workplace? One of the things I really encourage you to do is, yes, I think that it's very, very helpful to have a technology covenant. Maybe policy is not a great word, but just a technology agreement or a technology, something that helps communicate that we're together in this, and letting young people speak into it too. So even just saying, what ways do you think technology is going to help us best as a team? And what ways might it distract us? Most of us know technology can be a distraction to us, regardless of our age. So regardless of your team, just coming together and creating some guidelines, technology guidelines for your team or your organization together. And then sometimes even just letting them kind of test it for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, coming back as a group and reevaluating, or even if you're in a short-term missions team, and you're going to have a certain guideline, maybe having people practice that before you go to the field. So they can kind of see, how do I engage with technology and how can I use it in a positive manner, okay? Because millennials do employ technology, so we don't want to strip that from them. Gen Z, they can hack it, right? I mean, they're not just using it they're not a consumer of it, they're a controller of it, right? So these are some powerful skills too, for us to be able to leverage in different ministry contexts. I know I was talking to one missions agency that, they were just overwhelmed, had tons of work. This was overseas, one of their teams, and they had a young millennial show up for their team, and they had a software program that they had installed and they had not been able to get it to work. And the millennial within a week had the software program working, and it reduced everyone's workload by hours and hours and hours a week. And so we need to make sure we're utilizing these skills that younger people have on our teams as well. Okay. View of the future. I mean, we did talk about this a little bit, last night too. So, the silent generation coming out of World War II was like, stabilize the world, stabilize the world. Boomers were like, we're going to create a better world. And, as I said last night, it was really a lot of the changes in the 60s and 70s that ushered in the cultural shift that millennials and Gen Z have grown up with in the 80s and 90s. And so boomers did really implement a lot of the things that have led to change or growth in organizations. Gen X then kind of came along, and again, kind of being more of an ignored generation, they had a little more hopeless, cynical, skeptical view of the future. Maybe Gen X still can sometimes be a little, I am a Gen Xer, so I could say this. We can be a little skeptical. Okay, that's a great idea. Let's see if you actually do it right. Okay, and then millennials came along, like I said, very optimistic about the future. With some of that optimism has taken some dings over the last decade or so, but millennials in general still have a very positive outlook, hopeful outlook. And then Gen Z has really that fear of missing out. So, the world is so full of experiences, but many of them are scary and overwhelming. And I might miss out on something, but I'm almost scared to engage in something. And so it is this kind of decision paralysis, this fear of missing out, but at the same time, fear of doing something dangerous that can really be difficult for them sometimes. So we'll talk in a minute just about the, being able to really help encourage them in that. Okay. If you have questions, I'll keep the chat box open here as I'm presenting. So if you have questions on anything that I'm saying, feel free to pop those in the chat box and I'll just answer questions as I go. We don't even have to wait till the end. Okay, so as we think about just leadership and management, what does this kind of new arena where authority and leadership does not necessarily look the same as it did a couple of decades ago, and it's changing? What are some of the practical ways that this can actually take form? So in the past, a more traditional approach to leadership or management was, I need my paycheck. I want job satisfaction. My boss is my boss. They're going to tell me what to do. They don't need to make me happy. They don't need to listen to me. They're my boss, right? I'm going to get an annual performance review that's going to tell me what I'm doing well, what I need to change, what I need to improve. I need to work on my, it's going to help me know what my personal weaknesses are and how I need to grow in those areas. And work is my job. It does not have to be fun. It doesn't have to be exciting. It's my job, right? And what we're seeing with younger generations, and this has been, kind of slowly evolving for the last couple of decades, is that they really want their work or their volunteer position or their ministry position to have a sense of purpose. With Gen Z, they're going to be really looking for, does it connect specifically to my skills and my hobbies and my interest? They want to be developed. So the emerging kind of desire for leadership and management is to be an approach that's actually developing the people on the team and that they're growing. So again, this kind of goes back to me saying, ask young employees or young team members, what are your dreams for the future? What do you see yourself doing in 10 or 20 years? How can we support you in those goals now? So, and then coming alongside them as a coach. So I often tell people, if you're just doing still annual performance reviews, and you have young people on your team, that is not going to cut it. They're used to immediate feedback, right? If I post something within seconds, I can see if people like it or not. So as leaders and managers, mentors and teachers, we need to give them that kind of feedback. It doesn't have to be instantaneous, but they do want these ongoing conversations. That if there's something that needs to be corrected, they don't want to wait a year to find it out because they're probably going to be gone by then if they don't feel a connection to their leader or their manager. So just having these ongoing conversations where we're really investing in them in an ongoing manner, just saying, hey, I saw you do this. You know what? I think you could improve just a little bit if you tweak this. Let's try it next time. And then, giving them feedback the next time. They want to expand their personal strengths because most young people feel like they're competing in a global context. They are watching YouTube and Instagram and TikTok, and they can see people out there that are much better at most things than they are, right? So they want to know, what am I great at and how do I really develop that to be exceptional in these specific areas that are already my strengths? And they want their work to be their life's work. They want their ministry to be their life's work. They don't want to just be a job. Young people today are living much more integrated lives where, relationships and work and, personal concerns are all kind of colliding because they can check email at the beach, right, while they're on vacation and answer a colleague's question at work. And they can, while they're on a work trip or on a missions trip, FaceTime with their kids or their spouse back home. So this is leading to a much more integrated kind of approach, and they're looking for leaders who are going to value that. Okay, there's going to be a little redundancy here, but I just want to kind of run through how we see, the work ethic piece playing out. It relates a lot to how the leadership happens, but traditional work ethic would say work comes first. The emerging work ethic is life comes first. Young people are seeing that most people don't work for the same company or organization or ministry for 30 years anymore. Most young people are going to probably average at least 10 positions over the course of their life, right? Just because of the very nature of the changing context of the world around them. And, some of this comes out of the fact that, in the recession, they saw people who had worked for 20 or 30 years for organizations lose their job, or missionaries who lost partners after years and years and years of faithful service. And so then they didn't necessarily have other options because they'd done the same thing and had the same network for 20 or 30 years. So young people are really looking to kind of diversify their experiences, their learning, and their network so that it's viable regardless of what happens in their life, their lifetime. There's more viability for them. Traditionally we would say, follow the rules no matter what. If there's a company policy, if there's a ministry policy, this is, you signed on the dotted line. We're going to follow that no matter what. Whereas younger generations recognize that the world is changing so quickly. Sometimes the rules that we've had don't necessarily apply to the new context. And that's especially true as we're navigating things like a global pandemic, right? Where things are constantly changing. So being willing to say, okay, if they're pushing back on a rule, being able to sit down and talk about that. Why do we have the rule? Maybe we don't need the rule. Maybe we could change the rule. Okay, so they're very much wanting to be in a team or an environment where there's openness to making sure that what we're doing makes sense and works for this environment today. Okay, we've already talked about the boss deserves respect versus respect must be earned through relational capital. Seniority in the past equaled promotion and participation, whereas today they really feel like talent should equal promotion and participation. So if they feel like they're bringing a lot to the company, then they want to be recognized for that and they want to have a voice. Gone are the days where we're like, you need to put in your 3 years before you get to have any say in what happens around here. Because a lot of times millennials and Gen Z are going to be at a place for 3 years. So if we can engage them though, within the first 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, encouraging their input, engaging in their conversations and their questions about the rules and the policies and how we do things, engaging their technological expertise or other skills and gifts that they bring to the organization. If we can engage those early on and they feel like this is a place where I can invest, where I am valued, where what I bring is, helping in some way, and where there are people who are going to help me grow in places where maybe my blind spots, where I don't realize where I need to grow, then our potential of retaining that young person longer increases exponentially because we're making that relational investment in their work, in their lives. So, and traditionally we kind of viewed, your commitment to the job is 9 to 5 or whatever the work, hours were. If you left before 5, you were not committed or dedicated to the job, right? Whereas now, young people are living in this virtual context where right now, even the way we're doing schooling and work is changing, these definitions of what work is and what you get paid for. So, in a lot of cases, they believe if I get the work done in half of the time, then I shouldn't need to sit in the office for 4 extra hours and just look busy, right? So they can sometimes be much more efficient because they have these tools at their disposal that they know how to leverage. And they feel like if there's flexibility, why can't I work when I want to work? So, I have my podcast producer, he's a millennial who works another full-time job and freelances on the side. So there's a lot of times I'm getting my podcast files from him at, 4 in the morning. So Because I can, it doesn't matter. So depending on the work environment, right, that can be different. Dress the part at all times versus dressing the part as necessary will change to meet the needs of the organization versus, younger generations are saying, why shouldn't the organization to meet the needs of people, right? So if the people in the organization feel like this is not fitting their needs, what's the point of the organization? So they really do value the individuals and their experience much more than the organization or the institution. So here's something Jenny highlighted in her workshop earlier, that Gen Z really values face-to-face communication. That is absolutely true. Now, with traditionally in the workforce, a lot of our communication was face-to-face because, we didn't have as many technological tools at our disposal. In the past couple decades, we have a lot more, options for communicating. And what we see with younger generations is that if you can, send me a message or post a file or something for me to read when it's convenient to me or when I can work it in. Digital contact, when possible, is very, very helpful because they don't want to sit in a meeting and have an agenda read to them. They want to sit in a meeting and connect with people, right? They want to build those relationships. So face-to-face contact is very, very important for younger generations as well, but they want that face-to-face contact to be meaningful interaction, not reading an agenda or report. So use digital means when possible. So we've really moved from more of a compartmentalized lifestyle to kind of an integrated lifestyle. Okay, any questions at this point? Feel free to, if you have questions, drop them in the chat box. I don't see any right now, so I'll keep going, but feel free to post those. I'm not going to highlight all the things here, but this is what we're seeing in ministry context. A lot of times there can be intergenerational team frustration when some of the values are not aligning. So young people sometimes are coming into ministry context, whether it's a church or missions or some other type of ministry, and they're really wanting to have this sense of family, leaders as parents or mentors or coaches, a sense of intimacy where people are prioritized and we're really focusing on spiritual and personal growth of individuals and community and relationships. And sometimes what they encounter instead is more of a business approach where it feels like the leaders are our bosses, where there's a focus on programs and presentations and formality, that we're measuring success as numbers of bodies or members or buildings or budgets. And it feels sometimes like the ministry or the task is what is paramount versus the relationship. So that can be a huge disconnect for young people. And it can be one of the number one things that kind of turns them away from ministry. So about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when I started my research on intergenerational trends, really looking at young adults in the church and what was causing them to stay on staff or involved as volunteers in the church, this was one of the main things that was leading young people to leave the church, was just the sense that, this feels like a business or a club, not a family or a team. So really being aware of even just the tone and the language that we use as we're engaging young people. We've already kind of said, they don't sign up for membership necessarily. They kind of pick and choose and shop around. So you might see a lot of young people who go to one church for the Bible study because they love the small group leader, and another place because they love the worship. And now with virtual church, we're seeing that even more. But the good thing is if they're hungry, they're seeking right out these places where they can be fed. The last thing I'll just highlight, and Jenny mentioned this in her workshop as well, is just the downloading versus the uploading approach to teaching and guiding young people. So no longer do we really live in a world where young people, need to sit for an hour and listen to a presentation. So when I'm presenting in a college setting, my presentation style is much, much different than what I'm doing here today. In many cases, if we have an hour, I will talk for, 10 to 20 minutes of that hour, and the students will be talking for the rest of it, because younger people are an uploading generation. They value discussion. They learn through discussion. So, I have a colleague who often says the person who is talking is the person who is thinking, and the person who is thinking is the person who is learning. So if we can get young people talking, by asking them questions and asking their perspective, we can actually guide their learning much more effectively than if we just tell them the answers. Okay, one of my favorite models. So as we think about what do we need to do on intergenerational teams to really bring the generations together? One of my favorite models for thinking about leadership or management or mentoring or teaching is in General Stanley McChrystal's book, Team of Teams, where he talks about even the military, how they've had to change their mindset from that of a chess master, where you had all these little pieces on the board, and it was the chess master who decided who went where and how they did it, and they moved all the pieces and really controlled everything. And he just says that really today, with the complexity and the rapid change of the world around us, and this was pre-2020, which all of that has been accelerated in 2020, that really leaders, mentors, teachers need to approach it leading others more as a gardener. With all these plants in our garden plot, right? All these people that God has brought to us, and really understanding who are these plants and what makes them tick and where are they going to thrive and what's going to help them be successful. Some need a little more sunlight. Some need a little more water. Some need a little more, fertilizer. And as we create an environment where these plants can thrive, it actually helps alleviate our work as the manager or the team leader, because if they're thriving, they're going to be committed. They're going to be resolving some of their own conflicts. They're going to be, motivated. And so really just changing our mentality. It's really interesting. Margaret Mead, decades ago, said that we were headed towards a prefigurative culture. And what she means by that, and we really are living in it right now, that in a post-figurative culture, we're strongly past oriented. And so we focus on the past and we say, okay, what worked yesterday is working today. And I can copy it and teach it and model it to the next generation, and then they can do it, right? So we kind of pass things on from the past to the future. A configurative culture is one that's changing. And this is really what, we maybe saw in the 60s and 70s that launched us into this new era. We have found ourselves in a prefigurative culture now, where things are very future oriented, and we're looking towards the future as we're trying to adapt, right, what we're doing today to what is coming versus doing today what we did yesterday. And in this context, young people actually sometimes are more in tune with what's happening than their older leaders or mentors. And this can offer a really powerful opportunity for us to engage them in different ways than we maybe did in the past. I have learned I need young people on my team. I sometimes contract younger people just to help me because they understand intuitively what's happening in the world much better than I do when it comes to things like marketing and promotion and language. Even as Jenny was talking earlier, the meanings of things have changed. So I really encourage us to find, approach our relationships with key younger people who are on our teams or our staffs as a collaborative mentoring experiences. So saying, hey, I want to come alongside you. I want to be here for you. I want to cheer you on. I'm an advocate. I want to support you and help you grow, help you, give you constructive feedback. But I also want you to help me grow. I want to learn from you, because what we find is an intentional two-way relationship where we can learn from one another across generational or cultural lines really equips everyone more effectively. Earl Krebs has this great quote. He says, the rate of change in our culture puts younger people more in touch with things for which the elders sometimes even lack the vocabulary, suggesting the need to go beyond intergenerational tolerance to a new level of collaboration. And as we think about intergenerational work or ministry teams, I think this is something that can be exceptionally powerful when we have an environment that feels very much like there's collaborative mentoring. Okay, again, like I said, I'm just watching the chat box. I have it open. If you have questions, I'm just going to do questions as we go. So go ahead and throw anything in there. I see a few comments. That's great. Continue to post your comments if you'd like as well. So as we think about multi-generational leadership, here are some things that we're finding are successful in helping teams when we have multiple generations represented. First of all, to build trust and relationships with people of those different generations, right? And to approach it as a mentor and a coach. When you're a coach, you know that there's some people on the team who do not need a lot of feedback, right? Or don't want the feedback. You know, the plants in your garden who are like, just leave me alone and let me do my job. But you also are going to be tuned into the people who want a little extra feedback, a little extra cultivation, right, from the gardener. So just building the trust in the relationships that let you be the gardener and know the plants. This really requires emotional intelligence. I mean, we continue to see that EQ, or people skills, is one of the #1 factors in successful leadership today. Not necessarily IQ, but just that ability to relate to people, understand people. So one of the greatest things we can do as leaders today is really develop our people skills more effectively. Then, like I said, asking good questions and listening, actively listening, not listening to answer, but listening to understand, and building that collaborative mentoring environment. Responding effectively to the whys and communicating the vision. So if there is pushback on policies or procedures, inviting those questions, welcoming them, not being defensive, right? But welcoming them and showing that you're willing to talk them through and helping young people understand. I mean, it goes down to empowering that adaptability and smart autonomy. When young people, or any of us, understand the vision and why we're doing what we're doing, it helps us to adapt when things change. And suddenly, oh my goodness, now we're doing church in a virtual context, or we're doing virtual short-term missions trips. Okay, but what is our vision and how can we use new tools to accomplish that? I think another key thing on intergenerational teams is having leaders who understand some of these differences and perspectives and advocate to different members of the team for others, right? Whether that's, you know, advocating for some of the approaches of the experienced people to the younger, or the younger to the older. And then maximizing the strengths of an intergenerational team, which means sometimes some different exceptions might be made given people's skills or abilities or needs, right? But being able to advocate for all the members of the team and kind of target the intergenerational strengths that are there. Like I mentioned earlier with things like technology. Okay, I see, Nathan's your question. Do you think we are moving more toward multi-generational boards and control of things instead of just a CEO type running things? Yes, I do think we are going to see maybe in some cases multi-generational boards. I think we're already seeing a lot of that. I think most organizations recognize we need to have several young people, you know, on our boards, on the, you know, committees making decisions. I do think that even where you might still have a CEO type of leadership, where that CEO develops a team mentality within the organization, that can also work. So I think it can look different ways, but yes, I definitely think we're moving towards more of a collaborative, multi-generational approach. And really, if we don't do that, I don't think those organizations are going to survive or thrive. We have to have both perspectives. We need the wisdom and maturity and experience of older generations. We need the intuitive understanding of the context in which we're living right now from the younger generations. So finding ways to do that in your context, I think, are really helpful. In some cases, like I think about even at my church when I was serving on the missions board, you know, we made sure we had high school, college, young adults on our teams to be sure that we were getting all the perspectives, as we also had retirees, right? So, okay, Becky asks, what about when a younger supervisor who's over older person whose leadership style is authoritative, controlling, and following the rules? That does happen as well, okay? So, I mean, I am talking to more and more millennials who are trying to figure out how to lead Xers and boomers. And, you know, what I would say, regardless of where you are, if you're the younger leader or you're the, you know, maybe an older person reporting to a younger supervisor, this is where people skills come in. I love the movie, The Intern. If you've not watched it, where, you know, really it's this retiree who becomes an intern to a millennial supervisor who is not a great supervisor, right? But he, through his people skills and his wisdom and his servant's heart, ends up contributing, you know, immensely to the organization. And so I really think, regardless of where you are in the spectrum, if you're the leader or not the leader, if you're younger or older, those people skills and knowing how to understand the people you're working with and how to relate to them, what they need, leads us towards healing and a collaborative work environment. So I really think that is key, regardless of where you're at. So some of the things that we're seeing with effective multi-generational teams, please feel free to post any other questions. These are great. Some other effective multi-generational team strategies would be to make sure then that we're investing time and energy in getting to know one another. And I would say, even, Becky, in your question, regardless of where you're at, if you're the young supervisor or the older employee, just even maybe suggesting that, doing something fun together, or doing, like a personality profile and having a team building event can be really, really helpful for understanding that person and what's driving them. Maybe there are some fears or insecurities. So creating a context where people can get to know each other and be able to support one another better is really, really critical. We talked already kind of about that shared vision. And when every member feels like they have input, then they can have buy-in, even if their input's not always taken. So if you're a millennial supervisor with, Xers and boomers, make sure you're creating space for those boomers and Xers to give input. If you're a boomer and Xer with, millennials and Gen Zers, make sure you're creating space for everyone on the team to give input, because then they're going to be able to buy in. Invite and allow some change and risk taking. So a lot of times, younger people on the team have some ideas, but they might be afraid of failure because of the safety culture they're in. So we can really equip and empower them by encouraging them to try some new things. What ideas do they have for us to improve? And how can we give them a little bit of space to try something and take some risk? Like I said, even partnering people together so that they can learn from one another, which is part of that, creating that team collaborative environment, can be really powerful. And then really prioritizing regular feedback, like I said, that ongoing coaching and feedback and assessment and reflection, debriefing is really, really powerful with younger people for helping them grow, communicating that you care, that you're listening to them, that you're invested in them. Really viewing the team as part of the goal. Sometimes we're just like, the team is here to accomplish this task. Okay, the team is not just a means to an end, but when we prioritize the team as part of the ministry experience, right? Where discipleship and learning and growth and encouragement and all these things that are great and biblical can happen, then we are able to prioritize it differently than just kind of being focused on the end results. Okay, Don asked a great question. Missions work often requires long-term commitments to build trusting relationships among the group you're working with. How do you get younger generations to make this kind of commitment? So here's what we're finding. Just even the last, 5 to 10 years, I would say. And I would say this next workshop coming up in the Next Gen track will probably touch on this a little bit too. Is just, we have to create shorter on-ramps for them to give them the experience. Like I talked last night, they often are making decisions based on their emotions, experience, stories, relationships. So if we can create shorter on-ramps, whether that's a 6-month program, a 1-year program, a 2-year program, get them into a context where they can connect with people, team leaders who are there to mentor them and help them engage locally, then we're seeing a lot of young people turn around and make a longer term commitment. It's very hard for them, though, to commit to something that they've not experienced. So sometimes really creating those shorter term on-ramps and then making sure there's someone on those ramps with them who will coach and mentor and encourage them and help them really engage is often key to getting them to make that long-term commitment. So that's a great, great question. Okay, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. Many of you are probably familiar with his book and his work. It's my favorite model for using with intergenerational teams because it really starts by tackling any absence of trust that might exist and developing a true sense of harmony on the team so you can achieve results. So I strongly encourage that model if you are interested in it. Just more resources on team building. Okay, my website is leadingtomorrow.org. I do have a blog and a podcast and other things there. If you'd like to get the notes from the sessions today, again, I just plug the I'll just plug the link in the chat box again. You can make sure you put your email in there. I know that we've come up on our time for today, so I'm going to go ahead and just pause in case you want to. Oh, sure. Sorry. I'll go back to the last slide quick. In case you need to log off to get to the next session, that's totally fine. But I can just hang on for a few more minutes if anybody has Any other questions? So my website, yes, is leadingtomorrow.org, and my email, I'll just plug it in the chat box here quick. If anybody has any specific questions, feel free to just email me. Thank you. Yes, I love this topic, and I'm very, very passionate about what God is doing in this generation. I really believe that God is raising up a generation of Daniels and Esthers to lead and live in what feels like very uncertain, tumultuous times, right? And so I think it's exciting that we all get to be a part of just encouraging them. So thank you all for engaging this next generation and investing in them, because they definitely have a challenging time in which they're growing up and will be leading. So they need our support. Awesome. Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and